As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
It's Thursday, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and today is probably the most important episode that I have ever done on this show. And I don't say that lightly because obviously all of the topics that we discuss are very important. They concern family, faith, culture, civics, the Constitution, law, government, all of these things that we as conservatives are really deeply concerned about and we want to talk about and analyze from a biblical worldview perspective, a moral, truthful perspective, a constitutional perspective, and of course, an America First perspective. But today, we are going to analyze a topic that is really concerning to me because most conservatives that have reached out to me or responded on social media on this topic, I don't think understand the heart of the principle that's at stake here. And I want to explain to you why this is so incredibly important for conservatives that we are consistent in applying the principle of our rule of law equally and fairly, and the difference between political opinion versus the rule of law. So you might have already guessed where I'm going with this, and of course, it's Ron DeSantis in Florida versus Disney. So let's get a few things out of the way. First, I'm a huge fan of Ron DeSantis. Everybody knows that. I think he's been one of the best governors probably ever, and certainly right now in our country. I think he's done a ton of great work, and I champion his efforts on so many different levels. This is probably the first thing that I can recall that he's done over his gubernatorial tenure that I have staunchly disagreed with, and I'll explain to you why. Second, you all know that I'm a huge Disney fan. Love Disney, but you all know that I absolutely disagree with Disney's corporate statement against the Florida Parental Rights in Education bill, or what the left is calling the Don't Say Gay bill. Absolutely fundamentally disagree with Disney's statement on that. But all of those things, all of those political opinions are completely irrelevant to this conversation. And that's the heart of the issue. Because when we allow our partisan political perspectives to get in the way of our advocacy of the principle of the rule of law, then it becomes a force of whoever's party is in control rather than understanding how the law is meant to be equitable and fair to everyone's viewpoints, even if we as conservatives disagree with them or if the left disagrees with us. So my good friend over at National Review, it's a publication that, has had some of its issues, of course, with all of the Never Trumper stuff. I'm glad David French has left. We could talk about National Review. But Charles Cook, who's over there, actually has some amazing pieces that you should read. And one of the pieces that he published yesterday was talking about how Ron DeSantis and Florida has gone over the line in trying to retaliate, go scorched earth, or salt the earth, as he characterized it, in their retaliation against Disney for Disney's policy viewpoint statement against the Parental Rights in Education bill. And his point overall was saying, hey, Florida won. The legislation is in place. Disney made their statement. Move on. And he is totally right. And so what I tweeted was an analogy that then went viral on Twitter this morning where people were commenting on it. But my analogy said, Charles Cook is absolutely right. Imagine, if you will, Governor Gavin Newsom in California treating Chick-fil-A the same way as a corporate entity as Ron DeSantis is treating Disney in Florida. Now, a lot of people just totally miss the point of the analogy. And analogies are meant, of course, to take the underlying principle, put that principle in a different fact pattern to show how the principle is supposed to operate. And so for people, of course, Chick-fil-A doesn't have self-governance in California. We all know that. That's not the point of the analogy. And that's where the facts are not similar, the principle is similar. The point is that Chick-fil-A, everyone knows, is a Christian-oriented company. They express Christian viewpoints. They will express viewpoints as a corporation on a lot of different policy. And so they've even come under attack by not only California, but we remember the state of New York, a few private universities and public universities that wanted to say you can't come on campus because we don't like your views. And conservatives rightly were very upset about that. They said Chick-fil-A absolutely has the right to have Christian beliefs and be open as a corporation on their viewpoint toward policy, toward culture, toward anything else. So when we look at the context of Florida and Disney, why are so many conservatives saying this is great that Ron DeSantis is coming after Disney? The question here is, would you want the same treatment as Ron DeSantis in Florida is giving Disney if Disney was speaking things and policy and statements that you agreed with? That becomes the problem. And so we are not at all arguing in the context of this conversation whether or not we agree with Disney's statement. I don't. You probably don't. There are a lot of people that don't. But that's not the point. The point is that we have to defend Disney's right to say things even that we viscerally, absolutely think are wrong, even if we think they're morally wrong. Disney isn't doing anything illegal or immoral in terms of action by their statement. Now, is the statement advancing an immoral viewpoint? Yes. But in terms of under the law, Disney isn't doing anything other than exercising constitutionally protected speech. That is the entire point of this conversation. And so people on Twitter have been so outraged saying, no, go salt the earth, go retaliate against Disney, go tear them down. Democrats do this to conservatives all the time. And so Ron DeSantis should finally go after Disney. I'm glad to see a Republican finally exercising the same types of fights that Democrats do. Well, let's think about that for a moment. Just because the Democrats wield unconstitutional power and try to get away with it does not in any way justify Republicans doing the same. There was someone on Twitter who said, well, look at how the Democrats tried to treat corporations like the cake baker. And I responded, well, yeah, and the cake baker, if you recall, my good friend Jack Phillips from Masterpiece Cake Shop in my home state of Colorado, he won at the U.S. Supreme Court. Why? Because the government cannot discriminate against religious viewpoints and treat operations and businesses with discrimination just because of their preferences and their viewpoint and their sincerely held religious beliefs. Now, you may say, well, Disney's not exercising a religious belief. I actually think they are, because everything that we comment on in terms of morality is, of course, inherently religious. But the First Amendment not only protects free exercise of religion, but freedom of speech. And so speech by corporations on policies, whether they're for or against anything that any of us agree with, absolutely have the right to participate in a conversation, lobby their government, make statements, and do all of the things that everyone is allowed to do, whether or not we personally agree or disagree with that corporate statement. Do we really want the government to have a precedent that it can retaliate against a corporation because it doesn't like a statement that that corporation makes against legislation that the government is advocating for? That would have disastrous consequences. That would have a chilling effect on speech. And we know that the state of Florida is retaliating against Disney directly for the statement against the parental rights and education bill because the state of Florida has admitted it. Since the 1970s, Disney has had these entitlements. Now, we can have a conversation of whether or not that's a good thing, whether Disney should have these entitlements. Well, right now they have, and under the law, they've had reasonable reliance on these entitlements, the ability to self-govern, all of the things that the state of Florida decided to give to Disney. And the only reason that the Florida legislature and the Senate has passed this bill and the House is contemplating it and Ron DeSantis has said that he's going to sign it, the only reason that they are trying to strip Disney of those entitlements is because this is the latest salvo in the feud on the parental rights and education bill. That goes way too far. So let's give another analogy. If you don't like the Chick-fil-A one and you don't understand how that applies, well then think about it this way. What if Disney had those exact same entitlements in the state of California, and Disney as a corporation spoke out against California's legislation that's being contemplated right now and actually passed that's allowing for abortions up to live births after 28 days. Up until 28 days. I mean, it's so sick. It's so disgusting. It's so immoral. And I wish that Disney would come out and speak against that and say, of course, we can't kill our children after birth or even before birth. But this is hideously morally wrong. If Disney came out and made a statement against the state of California and that legislation, and Gavin Newsom said, and California, which is a Democrat-controlled legislative general assembly, they came out and said, you know what? We are now going to revoke your permits to do fireworks. We're going to try to create easements into Disney that are going to mess with your businesses. We're going to retaliate as the government because we don't like that you expressed your view against what the state general assembly wanted. That is the definition of tyranny. And so we as conservatives have to see the overall principle, because as much as everyone listening to this show would be absolutely opposed to Gavin Newsom exercising that type of power in California, you should, for the very same principle, be equally just as opposed to what Florida is trying to do to Disney simply because Disney disagreed with legislation. And everyone in the United States of America should have a constitutionally protected right to freedom of speech, freedom of viewpoint, free participation in the public square. We have to protect and preserve these freedoms, even for people who we absolutely disagree with and find their speech abhorrent. Their speech is just as protected as yours and mine. And people on Twitter and social media have been saying, well, this is socially irresponsible because Disney is just trying to groom children. And imagine, again, if you will, imagine if the left were using that same argument to try to say, well, it's socially irresponsible for corporations to say that they're opposed to a vaccine mandate, or corporations are opposed to abortion, or corporations are opposed to climate change legislation. That's socially irresponsible. Absolutely, the leftists would say that. So if we are advocating for precedent in Florida that is fundamentally foreclosing and retaliating against a corporation or individual's right to exercise their freedom of speech and have a political policy opinion, you better bet that is going to be used against you and me. And this is why principles matter. We cannot turn a legal conversation and a constitutional conversation into a political one. And it is really concerning to me that so many conservatives are out there suggesting and advocating for weaponizing our government simply because they don't like these woke corporations. That is not the way that we fight this in America. And I will stand firm, even with the hate on the right and the left. I will always stand firm on principle, because the Constitution is the design of our system of government that protects all of our rights. And if you want your rights to be protected, if you still want to have freedom of speech against censorship and retaliation from government, and those are two very different things, but if you want to be able to still speak freely, associate freely, freely exercise your religion, have all of these rights and be able to exercise them in America, then you better also defend the right of your neighbor, your fellow American, who is exercising those exact same rights in ways that you fundamentally politically disagree with. Because the only way that we have equal protection under the law, and the only way, as our founders in their wisdom understood, that our system of government works, is if we truly have freedom. And that means the freedom to disagree. Disney has the freedom to disagree with the state of Florida. You have the freedom to disagree with Disney. If you own a company and you want to have a corporate statement and you want to say that you disagree with Disney and you're in a blue state, you better hope that that government doesn't come after you. And I will defend your right to say that. But I will defend everyone's right to participate in the free marketplace of ideas and in the policy making and legislating of our government and our state and local government and our federal government, and a right to participate and have these debates without weaponizing our government and retaliation. Because once we cross that line and we say just because the Democrats break the rules, then we get to break the rules too, then we have lost all rule of law principled moral high ground, and that will not end well for America. The only reason that the judicial branch actually still functions most of the time in the constitutionally correct manner is because we have judges that aren't activists. We have judges that are not given to partisan policy and partisan politics. If I became a judge, and part of the reason I haven't, and I don't think I would ever want to, and in fact, I had this conversation with President Trump. He asked me if I wanted to be a federal judge, and I said respectfully, sir, no, I don't, because I'm an advocate for policy, and I want to be able to speak my opinions. And when you go into the judicial branch, you have to set aside all of your personal opinions, your political policy considerations, and you have to rule solely and squarely on the law. And so when I advocate in a legal posture rather than a political one, I am leaving my opinions about Disney, about Ron DeSantis, all of those things off the table. I'm leaving them, and I'm saying, what does the law say? What does the law protect? What is the principle at play? The principle here fundamentally is that the government cannot retaliate against a corporation or individual based on their exercising of a constitutionally protected right. And that has to be what conservatives advocate for and understand. We cannot, my friends, weaponize our government just because we like in one instance that the weaponizing is going to create a preferred outcome. We then become activists. Conservatives are not activists. We are principled. So debate all you want about how Disney is wrong in their statement and how you like the Florida bill and Ron DeSantis is great for signing that. All of those things in the political sphere. The two political branches of government, the legislative and the executive, argue that all we want. And I will debate that, and I will say why the Parental Rights and Education Bill is absolutely good legislation. And I've gone on record in the last few weeks, both here, Newsmax, and other outlets saying, I totally agree with that bill. Of course it makes sense. And the state of Florida won. Great. But what I will not abide, and what I will never advocate for, is for the state of Florida to retaliate against Disney simply because they disagreed. That is completely unconstitutional, and I'm predicting this now. If they pass this bill and revoke the entitlements based clearly on retaliation, Disney will sue, Disney will win, and that will be good precedent. Because that type of precedent then can be used for conservatives when Democrat-led government agencies and actors try to retaliate against us for our conservative viewpoints and our policy opinions. So I am thankful that our rule of law is going to protect Disney, and I'm predicting they would win that lawsuit. So the state of Florida better be careful. And I would defend Disney in that lawsuit, just like I will defend Jack Phillips, just like I defended John MacArthur when the state of California and LA County tried to retaliate against him for standing up and saying, these mandates and saying that my church can't open and freely exercise our religion. That's wrong. And he actually violated a mandate because it was unconstitutional. He stood with the Constitution. LA County tried to retaliate by revoking a parking lot lease that was held by the church about as long as Disney has held these other entitlements. Now, the analogy unsavvy will say, well, a parking lot's not the same as an entitlement. Obviously it's not, but the principle is the same. The church had a reasonable reliance on that leasehold that they've had since 1964. Disney has had this same entitlement and this same situation with Disney since the early 70s, late 60s, so about the same amount of time. The retaliation and the only reason that LA County or the state of Florida want to revoke those entitlements and those situations and those arrangements was purely based on vengeance and retaliation for free exercise of a constitutionally protected right to disagree with their government. And just as much as John MacArthur had the right to do that, and we won in the state of California, they had to pay us $800,000 in attorney's fees. As much as he won that, I would defend Disney, not because I agree with them, but because of the principle at stake. And in the very same way, John MacArthur was 100% right and the retaliation of LA County was wrong. In the exact same way, the retaliation against Disney is wrong. And I hope that you all see that and see the principle that we have to, in the legal sphere, have the same protections, the same rule of law. No one is above the law, but no one is below the law either. Disney isn't below the protections of the Constitution simply because we disagree with them. The best ways that we can stand up to Disney are by telling them that. By, as individuals, some of you have boycotted Disney. I addressed that on one of my previous episodes. Go and listen to that and my thoughts on all of that. We have choices in terms of how we use our dollars. We have choices as individuals and customers. Those are completely lawful exercises of fighting back, standing up. But what we can't do is lose the principle and lose the rule of law and ultimately lose our constitutional protections if we don't see that this is a very, very, very bad precedent. So as much as I love Ron DeSantis, as much as I disagree with Disney, I would fight for their right to exercise their constitutionally protected freedom of speech against government retaliation for that exercise. So I hope this has been a good explanation for you. And as always, please tweet, Facebook, Getter, Truth Social, all of those things. Tell me what you think. And I always love hearing from you. And this is so important. And like I said, this was probably the most important episode that I've recorded in a long time because we can all agree on policy. We can analyze all this. But when it comes to something that we deeply disagree with, are we going to be principled? Are we going to analyze this within the truth of our constitutional system and how it's designed? Or are we going to weaponize our government, and are we going to go on the partisan political offense just because it feels better? And if you're going on the partisan political offense just because it feels better, then I hate to break it to you, you're no better than a Democrat. I want to be better than Democrats. I want to be principled. I want to have a constitution that protects my rights. And so I'm going to protect everyone else's rights, even if I disagree. I'll see you soon.